Good morning, everyone. Today we are going to embark on the very first part of our psychology course, and appropriately, we'll start by asking the most basic but also the most profound questions. What is psychology? How did it come to be the discipline we know today? Before we dive into definitions and history, let me ask you this. Why do people do what they do? Why does one person become a brilliant artist while another struggles to remember what they had for breakfast? Why do some people experience overwhelming fear in situations that others find perfectly ordinary? Why do crowds behave differently from individuals? These are the kinds of questions that psychology seeks to answer. Section 1. Introduction. To understand why psychology matters, let's begin with a few real stories. Consider Clive Wearing, a British musician and conductor. After suffering brain damage from an illness, he lost nearly all of his ability to form new memories. Imagine living in a state where every moment feels like waking up for the first time. Yet Clive can still sit at the piano and play beautifully, his fingers remembering what his mind cannot. Now think about James Wannerton, who lives with a condition called synesthesia. For James, words have flavors. To him, someone's name might taste like rhubarb, while another word might taste like scrambled eggs. And then there is John Nash, the Nobel Prize-winning mathematician portrayed in the film A Beautiful Mind. Nash lived with schizophrenia, a disorder that caused him to experience powerful delusions and hallucinations. He believed, for example, that newspapers were sending him coded messages. Three very different people. Three very different ways of experiencing the world. Each case poses a fundamental question about human thought, perception, and behavior, and psychology, as a science, is designed to explore exactly these questions. Section 1.1, what is psychology? Psychology is most commonly defined as the scientific study of mind and behavior. Two key words are important here, scientific and study. First, psychology is a science. That means it is not based on intuition, guesswork, or common sense. Instead, psychologists use the scientific method. They form hypotheses, design experiments, collect evidence, and analyze the results. This allows them to separate fact from assumption and to build knowledge that is reliable and testable. Second, psychology is the study of both mind and behavior. The mind refers to our internal experiences, thoughts, feelings, memories, perceptions, dreams. The behavior refers to anything we do that can be observed, speaking, moving, reacting, interacting with others. Together, mind and behavior give us the full picture of what it means to be human. Now, you might ask, why is psychology important? Well, psychology helps us understand ourselves and others. It sharpens our critical thinking, which is essential in a world full of misinformation. It improves our communication skills by helping us see how people interpret words, gestures, and emotions differently. And it opens doors to many careers, clinical practice, teaching, research, human resources, counseling, law, marketing, and more. Psychology doesn't just live in classrooms or therapy rooms. It is applied in almost every aspect of daily life. So in short, psychology is the scientific lens through which we can better understand human experience and human action. Section 1.2, History of Psychology. To fully appreciate psychology today, we need to understand where it came from. Psychology did not appear fully formed. It grew out of philosophy and medicine and was shaped by debates about how best to study the human mind. Structuralism. The first formal psychology laboratory was established in 1879 by Wilhelm Wundt in Leipzig, Germany. This is often marked as the official birth of psychology as a separate scientific discipline. Wundt and his student, Edward Titchener, developed an approach called structuralism. Their goal was to break down conscious experience into its most basic elements, like scientists breaking down water into hydrogen and oxygen. They used a method called introspection, where trained participants describe their thoughts and sensations in detail when presented with stimuli. For example, if you gave someone a piece of chocolate, they wouldn't just say it tastes good. Instead, they would describe the sweetness, the texture, the emotions it evoked. The idea was to catalog the building blocks of experience. However, structuralism had a major flaw. It was too subjective. People's reports varied widely, and there was no reliable way to verify them. While structuralism is rarely practiced today, it was important because it set the stage for psychology as an experimental science, functionalism. In the United States, William James developed a different perspective called functionalism. James was influenced by Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. Instead of asking, what are the elements of the mind, he asked, what is the purpose of the mind? What functions do our thoughts and behaviors serve in helping us survive? For example, fear is unpleasant, but functionalists would argue that fear serves a purpose. It alerts us to danger and prepares us to act. Functionalism shifted the focus from static structures of the mind to dynamic processes of adaptation. Psychoanalysis. Around the same time in Vienna, Sigmund Freud was developing psychoanalysis. Freud proposed that much of human behavior is driven by the unconscious mind, thoughts, memories, and desires that lie beneath conscious awareness. He believed childhood experiences strongly shape adult behavior and personality. Freud developed techniques such as dream analysis, free association, and even the interpretation of slips of the tongue to access unconscious thoughts. While many of Freud's ideas are controversial and outdated by today's scientific standards, psychoanalysis was revolutionary in highlighting that behavior is not always rational and that unseen forces shape our lives. Gestalt psychology. Meanwhile, in Germany, psychologists like Max Wertheimer, Kurt Koffka, and Wolfgang Köhler were developing Gestalt psychology. Their famous phrase was, "The whole is greater than the sum of its parts." For example, when we listen to a melody, we don't just hear a series of notes, we hear a complete, unified tune. Gestalt psychology emphasized perception and how humans naturally organize sensory information into meaningful wholes. Behaviorism. By the early 20th century, psychology in the United States shifted again. John Watson and later B.F. Skinner argued that psychology should focus only on observable behavior, not on the mind, which they considered unmeasurable. This approach was called behaviorism. Watson and Skinner believed behavior could be explained by conditioning. Pavlov's experiments with dogs had already demonstrated classical conditioning, learning through association. Skinner expanded this with operant conditioning, showing how reinforcement and punishment shape behavior. Behaviorism dominated psychology for decades because it provided measurable, testable data, humanism, and the cognitive revolution. By the mid-20th century, however, many psychologists felt behaviorism was too limiting. Humanistic psychologists, such as Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers, emphasized free will, personal growth, and the human potential for self-actualization. At the same time, the cognitive revolution began. Influenced by advances in computer science and neuroscience, psychologists returned to studying mental processes, thinking, memory, problem-solving, and language. Noam Chomsky, for example, criticized behaviorism for ignoring the complexity of language acquisition. Feminist and multicultural psychology. Finally, more recent movements have highlighted the importance of diversity. In the 1960s, feminist psychologists criticized the male bias in much of psychological research and theory. Multicultural psychology has also expanded the field, recognizing that most psychological studies historically focused on narrow Western populations and failed to capture the experiences of people across different cultures. Closing thoughts. So, as we see, psychology has had a rich and complex history. It began with the introspection of Wundt's structuralism, evolved into James's functionalism, branched into Freud's psychoanalysis and Gestalt psychology, then shifted toward behaviorism before opening up again to humanism, cognitive psychology, and cultural perspectives. What unites all these approaches is a desire to understand the human mind and behavior. Each movement, even those now considered outdated, contributed something valuable to the field we practice today. As we continue this course, remember that psychology is not static. It grows, adapts, and changes with new discoveries. And it remains one of the most exciting fields because it touches on every aspect of what it means to be human.